minute increments. It'll drive me nuts. All right, let's try again. Now listen, Ace said. You better put your foot off with it. You ain't got the sack to shoot a woodchuck. He began to walk forward again, smiling his gentle smile as he came. You're just a sawed-off, pint-sized, pissy-ass little runt, and I'm gonna make you eat that fucking gun. Ace, if you don't stand still, I'm gonna shoot you, I swear to God. You'll go to jail, Ace crooned, not even hesitating. He was still smiling. The others watched with horrified fascination, much the same way as Teddy and Vern and I were looking at Chris. Ace Merrill was the hardest case for miles around, and I didn't think Chris could bluff him down. And what did that leave? Ace didn't think a 12-year-old punk would actually shoot him. I thought he was wrong. I thought Chris would shoot Ace before he let Ace take his father's pistol away from him. In those few seconds, I was sure there was going to be bad trouble, the worst I'd ever known. Killing trouble, maybe. And all of it over who got dibs on a dead body. Making sure this is still going. Find out. So far, so good. Okay. Chris said softly, with great regret. Where do you want it, Ace? Arm or leg? All right. So far, so good. I'm still watching it because I don't trust that it's going to stop, so. Chris said softly with great regret, Where do you want it, Ace? Arm or leg? I can't pick. You pick for me. And Ace stopped. His face sagged, and I saw sudden terror in it. It was Chris's tone rather than his actual words, I think. The real regret. That things were going to go from bad to worse. If it was a bluff, it's still the best I've ever seen. The other big kids were totally convinced. Their faces were squinched up as if someone had just touched a match to the cherry bomb with a short fuse. Ace slowly got control of himself. The muscles in his face tightened again. His lips pressed together, and he looked at Chris the way you'd look at a man who had made a serious business proposal. To merge with your company, or handle your line of credit, or shoot your balls off. It was a waiting, almost curious expression, one that made you know that the terror was either gone or tightly lidded. Ace had recomputed the odds of not getting shot and had decided that they weren't as much in his favor as he had thought. But he was still dangerous, maybe more than before. Since then, I've thought it was the rawest piece of brinkmanship I've ever seen. Neither of them was bluffing. They both meant business. All right, as Ace said softly, speaking to Chris. But I know how you're going to come out of this, motherfuck. No, you don't, Chris said. You little prick, Eyeball said loudly. You're going to wind up in traction for this. Bite my bag, Chris told him. With an inarticulate sound of rage, Eyeball started forward, and Chris put a bullet into the water about 10 feet in front of him. It kicked up a splash. Eyeball jumped back, cursing. Okay, now what? Ace asked. Now, you guys get into your cars and bomb on back to Castle Rock. After that, I don't care. But you ain't getting him. He touched Ray Brower lightly, almost reverently, with the toe of his sopping sneaker. You dig me? But we'll get you, Ace said. He was starting to smile again. Don't you know that? You might not. We'll get you hard, Ace said, smiling. We'll hurt you. I can't believe you don't know that. We'll put you all in the fucking hospital with fucking ruptures. Sincerely. Oh, why don't you just go home and fuck your mother some more? I hear she loves the way you do it. Ace's smile froze. I'll kill you for that. Nobody ranks my mom. I heard your mother fucks for bucks, Chris informed him, and as Ace began to pale, as his complexion began to approach Chris's own ghastly whiteness, he said, In fact, I heard she throws blowjobs for jukebox nickels. I heard. Then the storm came back, viciously all at once. Only this time, it was hail instead of rain. Instead of whispering or talking, the woods now seemed alive with honky B-movie jungle drums. It was the sound of the big icy hailstones bonking off of tree trunks. Stinging pebbles began to hit my shoulders. It felt as if some sentient, malevolent force was throwing them. Worse than that, they began to strike Ray Brower's upturned face with an awful splatting sound that reminded us of him again, of his terrible and unending patience. Vern caved in first, with a wailing scream. He fled up the embankment in huge, gangling strides. Teddy held out a minute longer, then ran after Vern, his hands held up over his head. On their side, Vince Desjardins floundered back under some nearby trees, and Fuzzy Brockowitz joined him. But the others stood pat, and Ace began to grin again. Stick with me, Gordy, Chris said in a low, shaky voice. Stick with me, man. I'm right here. Go on now, Chris said to Ace, and he was able by some magic to get the shakiness out of his voice. He sounded as if he was instructing a stupid infant. We'll get you, Ace said. We're not going to forget it, if that's what you're thinking. This is big time, baby. That's fine. You just go on and do your getting another day. We'll fucking ambush you, Chambers. We'll... Get out, Chris screamed, and leveled the gun. Ace stepped back. He looked at Chris a moment longer, nodded, then turned around. Come on, he said to the others. He looked back over his shoulder at Chris and me once more. Be seeing you. They went back into the screen of the trees between the bog and the road. Chris and I stood perfectly still, in spite of the hail that was welting us, reddening our skins, and piling up all around us like summer snow. We stood and listened, and above the crazy calypso sound of the hail hitting the tree trunks, we heard 2 cars starting up. Good, we're still good. Stay right here, Chris told me, and he started to cross the bog. Chris, I said, panicking. I got to. Stay here. It seemed he was gone a very long time. I became convinced that either Ace or Eyeball had lurked behind and grabbed him. I stood my ground with nobody but Ray Brower for company and waited for anybody to come back. After a while, Chris did. We did it, he said. They're gone. You sure? Yeah, both cars. He held his hands up over his head, locked together with the gun between them, and shook the double fist in a wry championship gesture. Then he dropped them and smiled at me. I think it was the saddest, scariest smile I ever saw. Suck my fat one? Whoever told you you had a fat one, LaChance? Biggest one in 4 counties, I said. Really? Hey, knock it off. Leave the cats alone. Biggest one in 4 counties, I said. I was shaking all over. Really? Excuse me. Phoebe, leave the cats alone. I'll be right back. I'm going to deal with this. Excuse you. I said leave the cats alone. No. Phoebe, leave the cat alone. Is that cat teasing you? No. You leave him alone. Harley, you're not helping. All right, outside. Let's go. If you're going to fight, you're going outside. Not fighting in here. Come on. Go play outside. Go on. Oh. Rats. Good gracious Lord. My apologies. I put them outside to play. They decided that they were going to chase cats, and I was like, nope, we're not doing that today. So they're outside now. Let's see. We looked at each other warmly for a second, and then, maybe embarrassed by what we were seeing, looked down together. A nasty thrill of fear shot through me, and suddenly, splash, splash, as Chris shifted his feet, let me know that he had seen too. Ray Brower's eye had gone wide and white, starry and pupilless, like the eyes that look out at you from Grecian statuary. It only took a second to understand. Hi! Uh, huh. Hmm. It only took a second to understand what had happened, but understanding didn't lessen the horror. No, thank you, but thank you. Now they were melting, and the water ran down his cheeks as if he were weeping from his own grotesque position. A tatty prize to be fought over by two bunches of stupid hick kids. His clothes were also white with hail. He seemed to be lying in his own shroud. Oh, Gordy, hey, Chris said, shaking. Say, hey, man, what a creep show for him. I don't think he knows. Maybe that was his ghost we heard. Maybe he knew this was going to happen. What a fucking creep show. I'm sincere. Branches crackled behind us. I whirled. Sure, they had flanked us. But Chris went back to contemplating the body after one short, almost casual glance. It was Vern and Teddy, their jeans soaked black and plastered to their legs, both of them grinning like dogs that had been sucking eggs. What are you going to do, man? Chris asked. What are we going to do? And I felt a weird chill steal through me. Maybe he was talking to me, but he was still looking down at the body. We're going to take him back, ain't we? Teddy asked, puzzled. We're going to be heroes, ain't that right? He looked from Chris to me and back to Chris again. Chris looked up as if startled out of a dream. His lip curled. He took big steps toward Teddy, planted both hands on Teddy's chest, and pushed him roughly backwards. Teddy stumbled, pinwheeled his arms for balance, then sat down with a soggy splash. He blinked up at Chris like a surprised muskrat. Vern was looking warily at Chris, as if he feared madness. Perhaps that wasn't far from the mark. Ooh. Ah, crap. Okay. I don't know how to actually get rid of this, so we're just going to leave that. Good. Okay. Now, question. I want to get rid of that. I'm tired of seeing it. Okay. Chris looked up as if startled out of a dream, his lip curled. He took big steps toward Teddy, landed both hands on Teddy's chest, and pushed him roughly backwards. Teddy stumbled, pinwheeled, his arms for balance, then sat down in a boggy splash. He blinked up at Chris like a surprised muskrat. Vern was looking warily at Chris, as if he feared madness. Perhaps that wasn't far from the mark. You keep your trap shut, Chris said to Teddy. Paratroopers over the side, my ass, you lousy rubber chicken. It was the hail, Chris cried out, angrily and ashamed. It wasn't these guys, Chris. I'm scared of storms. Can't help it. I would have taken all of them on at once. I swear on my mother's name. But I'm scared of storms. Shit, I can't help it. He began to cry again, sitting there in the water. What about you? Chris asked, turning to Vern. Are you as scared of storms too? Vern shook his head vivaciously, still astounded by Chris's rage. Hey, man, I thought we were all running. You must be a mind reader then, because you ran first. Vern swallowed twice and said nothing. Chris stared at him, his eyes sullen and wide. Then he turned to me. Gonna build him a litter, Gordy. If you say so, Chris. Sure. Like in Scouts. His voice had begun to climb into strange, reedy levels, just like in the fucking Scouts. A litter. Holes and shirts. Like in the handbook, right, Gordy? Yeah, if you want. But what if those guys... Fuck those guys, he screamed. You all a bunch of chickens? Fuck off, creeps. Chris, they could call the constable to get back at us. He's ours, and we're gonna take him out. Those guys would say anything to get us in ditch, I told him, my words sounding thin, stupid, sick with the flu. Say anything and then lie each other up. You know how people can get other people in trouble telling lies, man. Like with the milk I don't care, he screamed, and lunged at me with his fists up. But one of his feet struck Ray Brower's ribcage with a soggy thump, making the body rock. He tripped and fell full length, and I waited for him to get up and maybe punch me in the mouth, but instead, he lay where he had fallen, head pointing toward the embankment, arms stretched out over his head like a diver about to execute, in the exact posture Ray Brower had been in when we found him. I looked wildly at Chris's feet to make sure his sneakers were still on. Then he began to cry and scream, his body bucking in the muddy water, splashing it around, fists drumming up and down in it, head twisting from side to side. Teddy and Vern were staring at him, agog, because nobody had ever seen Chris Chambers cry. After a moment or two, I walked back to the embankment, climbed it, and sat down on one of the rails. Teddy and Vern followed me, and we sat there in the rain, not talking, looking like three monkeys of virtue they sell in dime stores and those sleazy gift shops that always look like they are tottering on the edge of bankruptcy. It was 20 minutes before Chris climbed the embankment to sit down beside us. The clouds had begun to break. Spears of sun came down through the ribs. The bushes seemed to have gone 3 shades darker green in the last 45 minutes. He was mud all the way up one side and down the other. His hair was standing up in muddy spikes. The only clean parts of him were the whitewashed circles around his eyes. You're right, Gordy, he said. Nobody gets last dibs. Goocher all around, huh? I nodded. 5 minutes passed. No one said anything. And I happened to have a thought, just in case they did call Bannerman. I went back down the embankment and over to where Chris had been standing. I got down on my knees and began to comb carefully through the water and marsh grass with my fingers. What are you doing? Teddy asked, joining me. It's to your left, I think, Chris said and pointed. I looked there, and after a minute or two, I found both shell casings. They winked in the fresh sunlight. I gave them to Chris. He nodded and stuffed them into his pocket of his jeans. Now we go, Chris said. Hey, come on, Teddy yelled in real agony. I want to take him. Listen, dummy, Chris said. If we take him back, we could all wind up in the infirmary. It's like Gordy said. These guys could make up any story they wanted to. What if they said we killed him? Huh? What would you like? How would you like that? I don't give a damn, Teddy said sulkily. Then he looked at us with an absurd hope. Besides, we might only get a couple of months or so as accessories. I mean, we're only 12 fucking years old. They ain't gonna put us in Shawshank, Chris said softly. And that's funny because Shawshank's another book. Chris said softly, You can't get in the army if you got a record, Teddy. I was pretty sure that was nothing but a bald-faced lie, but somehow this didn't seem the time to say so. Teddy just looked at Chris for a long time, his mouth trembling. Finally, he managed to speak out. No shit? Asked Gordy. He looked at me hopefully. He's right, I said, feeling like a great big turd. He's right, Teddy. First thing they do when you volunteer is to check your name through R&I. Holy God! We're going to shag ass back to the trestle, Chris said. Then we'll get off the tracks and come into Castle Rock from the other direction. If people ask where we were, we'll say we went camping up at Brickyard Hill and got lost. Milo Pressman knows better, I said. That creep at the Florida market does too. Well, we'll say Milo scared us, and that's when we decided to go up to the Brickyard. I nodded. That might work. If Vern and Teddy could remember to stick to it. What about if our folks get together? Vern asked. You worry about it if you want, Chris said. My dad'll still be juiced up. Come on, then, Vern said, eyeing the screen of trees between us and the back Harlow Road. He looked like he expected Bannerman, along with a brace of bloodhounds, to come crashing through at any moment. Let's get while the getting's good. We were all on our feet now, ready to go. The birds were singing like crazy, pleased with their rain and shine and the worms and just about everything in the world, I guess. I swear, reading hates me because then I begin to yawn. I don't like it. We all turned around as if pulled on strings and looked back at Ray Brower. He was laying there, alone again. His arms had flopped out when we turned him over. Now he was sort of spread-eagled, as if to welcome the sunshine. For a moment it seemed all right, the more natural dead scene than any ever constructed for a viewing room audience by a mortician. Then you saw the bruise, the caked blood on the chin and under the nose, and the way the corpse was beginning to bloat. You saw that the blue bottles had come out with the sun, and that they were circling the body, buzzing indolently. Oh my Lord, indolently. You remembered that grassy smell, sickish but dry, like farts in a closed room. He was a boy our age. He was dead. I am sorry. And I rejected the idea that anything about it could be natural. I pushed it away with horror. Okay, Chris said. And he meant to be brisk, but his voice came out of his throat like a handful of dry bristles from an old whisk broom. Double time. We started to almost trot back the way we had come. We didn't talk. I don't know about the others, but I was too busy thinking to talk. There were things... Good Lord. There were things that bothered me about the body of Ray Brower. They bothered me then, and they bother me now. A bad bruise on the side of his face, a scalp laceration, a bloody nose. No more, at least no more visible. People walked away from bar fights in worse condition and go right on drinking. Yet the train must have hit him. Why else would his sneakers be off his feet that way? And how come the engineer hadn't seen him? Could it be that the train had hit him hard enough to toss him, but not to kill him? Why? Oh. Do you mind? Why are you barking? Stop it, please. There's nobody there. Timber, come here. Timber, come here. Move it. Timber, and you hush. Are you two done? Can I finish now? You meaty heads? Oh, hard enough reading this, describing a kid. And then you guys go on doing that. Yes, I'm between allergies and a bit of tears. It's really hard to read sometimes. I get emotional. What can I say? And how come the engineer hadn't seen him? Could it be that the train had hit him hard enough to toss him but not to kill him? I thought that, under just the right combination of circumstances, that could have happened. Had the train hit him a hefty, teeth-rattling sideswipe as he tried to get out of the way, hit him and knocked him in a flying backward somersault over that caved-in banking? Had he perhaps lain awake and trembling in the dark for hours? Not just lost now, but disoriented as well, cut off from the world? Maybe he had died of fear. A bird with crushed tail feathers once died in my cupped hands, in just that way. Its body trembled and vibrated lightly. Its beak opened and closed. Its dark, bright eyes stared up at me. Then the vibration quit. The beak froze half open, and the black eyes became lackluster and uncaring. It could have been that way with Ray Brower. He could have died because he was simply too frightened to go on living. But there was another thing, and that bothered me most of all, I think. He had started off to go berrying. I seem to remember the news report saying he'd been carrying a pot to put berries in. When we got back, I went to the library and looked it up in the newspapers just to be sure, and I was right. He'd been berrying. Give me one sec. Yes. It's okay. I'll talk to you in a few. All right. Bye. Oh, he'd been berrying, and he'd had a pail or a pot, something like that, but we hadn't found it. We found him, and we found his sneakers. He must have thrown it away somewhere between Chamberlain and the boggy patch of ground in Harlow where he died. He perhaps clutched it even tighter at first, as though it linked him to home and safety. But as his fear grew, and with it the sense of being utterly alone, with no chance of rescue except for whatever he could do by himself, as the real cold terror set in, he maybe threw it away into the woods, on one side of the tracks or the other, hardly ever noticing it was gone. I've thought of going back and looking for it. How does that strike you for morbid? I've thought of driving to the end of Back Harlow Road in my almost new Ford van and getting out of it some bright, sunny summer morning all by myself, my wife and children off in another world where, if you turn a switch, lights come on in the dark. I've thought about how it could be, pulling my pack out of the back and resting it on the customized van's rear bumper while I carefully removed my shirt and tied it around my waist, rubbing my chest and shoulders with muscle insect repellent, and then crashing through the woods to where the boggy place was, the place where we found him. Would the grass grow up yellow there in the shape of his body? Of course not. There would be no sign. But still you wonder, you realize what a thin film there is between your rational man costume, the writer with leather elbow patches on his corduroy jacket, and the capering Gorgon myths of childhood. Then climbing the embankment, now overgrown with weeds. Okay. And walking slowly beside the rusted tracks and rotted ties toward Chamberlain. Stupid fantasy. An expedition looking for a 20-year-old blueberry bucket, which was probably cast deep into the woods or plowed under by a bulldozer readying a half-acre plot for a tract house, or so deeply overgrown by weeds and brambles it had become invisible. But I feel sure it is still there, somewhere along the old discontinued GS and WM line, and at times the urge to go and look is almost a frenzy. It usually comes early in the morning when my wife is showering and the kids are watching Batman and Scooby-Doo on Channel 38 out of Boston, and I am feeling the most like the pre-adolescent Gordon LaChance that once strode the earth, walking and talking, and occasionally crawling on his belly like a reptile. That boy was me, I think, and the thought which follows, chilling me like a dash of cold water, is, which boy do you mean? Sipping a cup of tea, looking at the sun slanting through the kitchen windows, hearing the TV from one end of the house, the shower from the other, feeling the pulse behind my eyes, which means I got through one beer too many the night before. I feel sure I could find it. I would see clear metal winking through rust, the bright summer sun reflecting it back to my eyes. I would go down the side of the embankment, push aside the grasses that had grown up, entwined toughly around its handle, and then I would, what? Why? Simply pull it out of time. I would turn it over and over in my hands, wondering at the feel of it, marveling at the knowledge that the last person to touch it had been long years in his grave. Suppose there was a note in it. Help me, I'm lost. Of course there wouldn't be. Boys don't go out to pick blueberries with paper and pencil. But just suppose. I imagine the awe I'd feel would be as dark as an eclipse. Still, it's mostly just the idea of holding that pail in my hands, I guess. As much a symbol of my living as his dying. Proof that I really do know which boy it was. Which boy of the five of us. Holding it. Reading every year. In its cake of rust and fading of its bright shine. Feeling it. Trying to understand the sun that shone on it. The rains that fell on it. And the snow that covered it. And to wonder where I was when each thing happened to it in its lonely place, where I was, what I was doing, what was I loving, how I was getting along, where I was. I'd hold it, read it, feel it, and look at my face and whatever reflection might be left. Can you dig it? We got back to Castle Rock a little past 5 o'clock on Sunday morning, the day before Labor Day. We had walked all night. Nobody complained, although we all had blisters. and we're all ravenously hungry. My head was throbbing with a killer headache, and my legs felt twisted and burning with fatigue. Twice we had to scramble down the embankment to get out of the way of freights. One of them was going our way, but moving too fast to hop. It was seeping daylight when we got to the trestle spanning the castle again. Chris looked at it, looked at the river, looked back at us. Fuck it, I'm walking across. If I get hit by a train, I won't have to watch out. Fucking Ace Merrill. We all walked across it. Plotted might be the better verb. No train came. When we got to the dump, we climbed the fence. No Milo, no Chopper. Not this early. Not on a Sunday morning. And went directly to the pump. Vern primed it, and we all took turns sticking our heads under the icy flow, slapping the water over our bodies, drinking it until we could hold no more. Then we had to put our shirts on again because the morning seemed chilly. We walked, limped, back into town and stood for a moment on the sidewalk in front of the vacant lot. We looked at our treehouse as we wouldn't have looked at each other. Well, Teddy said, at last. See you in school on Wednesday. I think I'm going to sleep until then. Me too, Vern said. I'm too pooped to pop. Chris whistled tunelessly through his teeth and said nothing. Hey, man, Teddy said awkwardly. No hard feelings, okay? Nope, Chris said, and suddenly his somber, tired face broke into a sweet and sunny grin. We did it, didn't we? We did the bastard. Yeah, Vern said. You're fucking A. Now Billy's gonna do me. So what, Chris said. Richie's gonna tool up on me, and Ace is probably gonna tool up on Gordy, and somebody'll tool up on Teddy. But we did it. That's right, Vern said. But he still sounded unhappy. Chris looked at me. We did it, didn't we? He asked softly. It was worth it, wasn't it? Sure it was, I said. Fuck this, Teddy said in a dry, I'm losing interest way. You guys sound like fucking Meet the Press. Give me some skin, man. I'm gonna toot home and see if Mom's got me on the 10 most wanted list. We all laughed. Teddy gave us a surprised, oh Lord, what now look, and we gave him skin. Then he and Vern started off in their direction, and I had gone in mine. But I should have gone in mine, but I hesitated for a second. Walk with you, Chris offered. Sure, okay. We walked a block or so without talking. Castle Rock was awesomely quiet in the day's first light, and I felt as almost holy tiredness is slipping away sort of feel. We were awake and the whole world was asleep, and I almost expected to turn the corner and see my dear standing at the far end of the Carbine Street, where the GS and WM tracks pass through the mill's loading yard. Finally, Chris spoke. They'll tell, he said. You bet they will, but not today or tomorrow. And if that's what you're worried about, it'll be a long time before they tell, I think. Years, maybe. He looked at me surprised. They're scared, Chris. Teddy especially. That they won't take him in the army, but Vern's scared too. They'll lose some sleep over it, and there's going to be times this fall when it's right on the tip of their tongues to tell somebody. But I don't think they will. And then, you know what? It sounds fucking crazy, but I think they'll almost forget it ever happened. He was nodding slowly. I didn't think of it just like that. You see through people, Gordy. Man, I wish I did. You do, though. We walked another block in silence. I'm never going to get out of this town, Chris said and sighed. When you come back from college on summer vacation, you'll be able to look me and Vern and Teddy up down at Suski's after the 7 to 3 shift's over, if you want to. Except you'll probably never want to. He laughed a creepy laugh. Quit jerking yourself off, I said, trying to sound tougher than I felt. I was thinking about being out there in the woods, about Chris saying, and maybe I took it to old lady Simmons and told her, and maybe the money was all there, and I got a 3-day vacation anyway because the money never showed up. And maybe the next week old Lady Simmons had this brand new skirt on when she came to school. The look in his eyes. No, jerk off, Daddy-o, Chris said. I rubbed my first fist together, blah, blah, blah. I rubbed my first finger against his thumb. This is the world's smallest violin playing. My heart pumps purple, piss for you. He was ours, Chris said, his eyes dark in the morning light. He had reached the corner of my street, and we stopped there. It was 6:15. Back toward town, we could see the Sunday telegram truck pulling up in front of Teddy's uncle's stationery shop. A man in blue jeans and t-shirt threw off a bundle of papers. They bounced upside down on the sidewalk, showing the color funnies. Always Dick Tracy and Blondie on the first page. Then the truck drove on, its driver intent on delivering the outside world to the rest of the whistle stops up the line. Otisfield, Norway, South Paris, Waterford, Stoneham. I wanted to say something more to Chris, and I didn't know how to. Give me some skin, man, he said, sounding tired. Chris? Skin. I gave him some skin. I'll see ya. He grinned, that same sweet, sunny grin. Not if I see you first, fuckface. He walked off, still laughing, moving easily and gracefully, as though he didn't hurt like me and have blisters like me, and like he wasn't lumped and bumped with mosquitoes and chigger and black fly bites like me. As if he didn't have a care in the world. As if he was going to some real boss place instead of just home to a 3-room house. Shack would have been closer to the truth. With no indoor plumbing and broken windows covered with plastic and a brother who was probably laying for him in the front yard. Even if I'd known the right thing to say, I probably couldn't have said it. Speech destroys the functions of love, I think. That's the hell of a thing for a writer to say, I guess. But I believe it to be true. If you speak to tell a deer you mean it no harm, it glides away with a single flip of its tail. The word is the harm. Love isn't what these asshole poets like McQueen want you to think. Love has teeth. They bite. The wounds never close. No word, no combination of words can close those love bites. It's the other way around. That's the joke. If those wounds dry up, the words die with them. Take it from me. I've made my life from the words, and I know that is so. The back door was locked when I fished the spare key out from under the mat and let myself in. The kitchen was empty, silent, suicidally clean. I could hear the hum the fluorescent bars over the sink made when I turned on the switch. It had been literally years since I had been up before my mother. I couldn't even remember the last time such a thing had happened. I took off my shirt and put it on the plastic clothes basket behind the washing machine. I got a clean rag from under the sink and sponged off with it, face, neck, pits, belly. Then I unzipped my pants and scrubbed my crotch, testicles in particular, until my skin began to hurt. It seemed I couldn't get clean enough down there, although the red wheel left by the bloodsucker was rapidly fading. I still have a tiny crescent-shaped scar there. My wife once asked about it, and I told her a lie before I was even aware I meant to do so. When I was done with the rag, I threw it away. It was filthy. I got out a dozen eggs and scrambled 6 of them together. When they were semi-solid in the pan, I added a side dish of crusted pineapple and a half a quart of milk. I was just sitting down to eat when my mother came in, her gray hair tied in a knot behind her head. She was wearing a faded pink bathrobe and smoking a Camel. "Gordon, where you been?" "Camping," I said, and began to eat. We started off in Vernsfield, then went up to Brickyard Hill. Vern's mom said she would call you, didn't she? She probably talked to your father, she said, and glided past me to the sink. She looked like a pink ghost. The fluorescent bars were less than kind to her face. They made her complexion look almost yellow. She sighed, almost sobbed. I miss Dennis most in the morning, she said. I always look in this room, and it's always empty, Gordon. Always. Yeah, that's a bitch, I said. He always slept with his window open and the blankets. Gordon, did you say something? Nothing important, Mom. And the blankets pulled up to his chin, she finished. Then she just stared out the window, her back to me. I went on eating. I was trembling all over. The story never did get out. Oh, I don't mean that Ray Brower's body was never found. It was. But neither our gang nor their gang got the credit. In the end, Ace must have decided that an anonymous phone call was the safest course, because that's how the location of the corpse was reported. What I meant was that none of the parents ever found out what we'd been up to that Labor Day weekend. Chris's dad was still drinking, just as Chris had said he would be. His mom had gone off to Lewiston to stay with his sister, the way she always did when Mr. Chambers was on a bender. She went and left Eyeball in charge of the younger kids. Eyeball had fulfilled his responsibility of going off with Ace and his JD buddies, leaving 9-year-old Sheldon, 5-year-old Emery, and 2-year-old Deborah to sink or swim on their own. Teddy's mom got worried the second night and called Vern's mom. Vern's mom, who was also never going to do the game show circuit, said we were still out in Vern's tent. She knew because she had seen the light in there. The light on in there the night before. Teddy's mom said she sure hoped no one was smoking cigarettes in there, and Vern's mom said it looked like a flashlight to her. Besides, she was sure that none of Fern's or Billy's friends smoked. My dad asked me some vague questions, looking mildly troubled at my evasive answers. Said we'd go fishing together sometime, and that was the end of it. If the parents had gotten together in a week or two afterwards, everybody would have fallen down, but they never did. Milo Pressman never spoke up either. My guess is that he thought twice about it being our word against his, and how we would all swear that he sicked Chopper on me. So the story never came out. That wasn't the end of it. One day, near the end of the month, while I was walking home from school, a black 1952 Ford cut into the curb in front of me. There was no mistaking that car. Gangster white wheels and spinner hubcaps, high-rise chrome bumpers, and Lucite death knob with a rose embedded in it, clammed to the steering wheel. Painted on the back deck was a deuce and a one-eyed jack. Beneath them, in Roman Gothic script, were the words, "Wild Card." The doors flew open. Ace Merrill and Fuzzy Brockowitz stepped out. "Cheap hood, right?" Ace said, smiling his gentle smile. "My mother loves the way I do it to her, right?" We're gonna rake you, bud. We're gonna rake you, baby," Fuzzy said. I dropped my school books on the sidewalk and ran. I was busting my buns, but they caught me before I ever made the end of the block. Ace hit me with the flying tackle, and I went full length on the paving. My chin hit the cement. And I didn't just see stars. I saw whole constellations, whole nebulae. I was already crying when they picked me up. Not so much from my elbows and knees, both pairs of scraped and bleeding, or even from fear. It was a vast, important rage that made me cry. Chris was right. He had been ours. I twisted and turned and almost squiggled free. Then Fuzzy hoiked his knee into my crotch. Oh, the pain was amazing, incredible, non-burial. I can't imagine. I'm sorry. It widened the horizons of pain from plain old widescreen to VistaVision. I began to scream. Screaming seemed to be my best chance. Ace punched me twice in the face, long and looping haymaker blows. The first one closed my left eye. It would be 4 days before I was really able to see out of that eye again. The second broke my nose with a crunch that sounded the way crispy cereal sounds inside your head when you're chewing. Then old Mrs. Chalmers came out of her porch with her cane clenched in one arthritis twisted hand and a Herbert Tarleton jutting from one corner of her mouth. Must be a cigar or cigarette. She began to bellow at them. Hi there, you boys! You stop that! Police! Police! Don't let me see you around, dipshit, Ace said, smiling, and let go of me and backed off. I sat up, then leaned over, cupping my wounded balls. Yeah, sickly sure I was going to throw up and then die. I was still crying, too. But when Fuzzy started to walk around me, the sight of his pegged jeans leg, snugged down over the top of his motorcycle boot, brought all the fury back. I grabbed him and bit his calf through his jeans. Oh, yeah. I bit him just as hard as I could. Fuzzy began to do a little screaming of his own. He also began hopping around on one leg, and incredibly, he was calling me a dirty fighter. I was watching him hop around, and that was when Ace stomped down on my left hand. Ouch. Breaking the first 2 fingers. I heard them break. They didn't sound like crispy cereal. They sounded like pretzels. Then Ace and Fuzzy were going back to Ace's 52. Ace sauntering with his hands in his back pockets, Fuzzy hopping on one leg and throwing curses back over his shoulder at me. I curled up on the sidewalk crying. Aunt Evie Chalmers came down her walk, thudding her cane angrily as she came. She asked me if I needed the doctor. I sat up and managed to stop most of the crying. I told her I didn't. Bullshit, she bellowed. Aunt Evie was deaf and bellowed everything. I saw where that bully got you. Boy, your sweetmeats are gonna swell up like the size of mason jars. Wow. I can't imagine you even being able to wear pants. Oh. She took me into her house, gave me a wet rag for my nose. It had begun to resemble a summer squash by then, and gave me a big cup of medicinal tasting coffee that was somehow calming. She kept bellowing at me that she should call the doctor, and I kept telling her not to. Finally, she gave up, and I walked home. Very slowly, I walked home. My balls weren't the size of mason jars yet, but they were on their way. My mom and dad got a look at me and wigged right out. I was sort of surprised that they noticed anything at all, to tell the truth. Who were the boys? Can you pick them out of a lineup? That from my father, who never missed Naked City or The Untouchables. I said I didn't think I could pick the boys out of a lineup. I said I was tired. Actually, I think I was in shock and more than a little drunk from Aunt Evie's coffee, which must have been at least 60% VSOP brandy. Ooh. I said I thought they were from some other town or from up in the city, a phrase everyone understood to mean Lewiston, Auburn. They took me to Dr. Clarkson in the station wagon. Dr. Clarkson, who was still alive today, was even then old enough to have quite possibly been in armchair to armchair terms with God. On terms with God. He set my nose and my fingers and gave my mother a prescription for painkiller. Then he got them out of the examining room on some pretext or other and forward, like Boris Karloff approaching Igor. Who did it, Gordon? I don't know, Dr. Clark. You're lying. No, sir, His sallow cheeks began to flow with color. Why should you protect the cretins who did this? Do you think they will respect you? They will laugh and call you stupid fool. Oh, they'll say. There goes that stupid fool we beat up for kicks the other day. Ha ha, hoo hoo. Har dee har har har. I didn't know them really. I could see his hands itching to shake me, but of course, He couldn't do that. So he sent me out to my parents, shaking his white head, muttering about juvenile delinquents. He would no doubt tell his old friend God all about it that night over their cigars and sherry. I didn't care if Ace and Fuzzy and the rest of those assholes respected me or thought I was stupid or never thought about me at all. But there was Chris to think of. His brother Eyeball had broken his arm in 2 places. Ouch! And had left his face looking like a Canadian sunrise. Oh, damn. They had to set the elbow break with a steel pin. Mrs. McGinn, from down the road, saw Chris staggering along the soft shoulder, bleeding from both ears and reading a Richie Rich comic book. She took him to the CMG emergency room where Chris told the doctor he had fallen down the cellar stairs in the dark. Right, the doc said. Every bit as disgusted with Chris as Dr. Clarkson had been with me. And then he went to call Constable Bannerman. When he did that from his office, Chris went slowly down the hall, holding the temporary sling against his chest so the arm wouldn't swing and grate the broken bones together, and used a nickel in the payphone to call Mrs. McGinn. He told me later it was the first collect call he had ever made, and he was scared to death that she wouldn't accept the charges, but she did. Chris, are you all right? She asked. Yes, thank you, she said. I'm sorry I couldn't stay with you, Chris, but I had pies in the... That's all right, Mrs. McGinn, Chris said. Can you see the Buick in our dooryard? The Buick was the car Chris's mother drove. It was 10 years old, and when the engine got hot, it smelled like frying hush puppies. Wow. It's there, she said cautiously, but not to mix in too much with the Chamberses. Poor white trash, shanty Irish. Would you go over and tell Mama to go downstairs and take the light bulb out of the socket in the cellar? Chris, I really eat my pies. Tell her, Chris said implaceably, to do it right away, unless she wants my brother to go to jail. There was a long pause, and then Mrs. McGinn agreed. She asked no questions, and Chris told her no lies. Constable Bannerman did indeed come out to the Chambers' house, but Richie Chambers didn't go to jail. Vern and Teddy took their lumps too, although not as bad as Chris or I. Billy was laying for Vern when Vern got home. He took after him with the stove length and hit him hard enough to knock him unconscious after only 4 or 5 good licks. What the hell's a stove length? Vern was no more than stunned, but Billy got scared he might have killed him and stopped. What the hell is a stove length? Oh, would you stop burning? Go away. My vape. 1960 stove length. The hell's a stove length? What is a stove length? I have no idea. Does anybody else know? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's some kind of piping? No. Makes no sense. I don't know what it is. I looked it up. I can't figure it out. So if anybody knows what a stove length is, please tell me. All right. 3 of them caught Teddy walking home from the vacant lot one afternoon. They punched him out and broke his glasses. He fought them, but they wouldn't fight him when they realized he was groping after them like a blind man in the dark. We hung out together at school, looking like the remains of a Korean assault force. Nobody knew exactly what had happened, but everybody understood that we'd had a pretty serious run-in with the big kids and comported ourselves like men. A few stories went around. All of them were wildly wrong. When the casts came off and the bruises healed, Vern and Teddy just drifted away. They had discovered a whole new group of contemporaries that they could lord it over. Most of them were real, wet, scabby, scrubby little fifth-grade assholes, but Vern and Teddy kept bringing them to the treehouse, ordering them around, strutting like Nazi generals. Chris and I began to drop by there less and less frequently, and after a while, the place was theirs by default. I remember going up one time in the spring of 1961 and noticing that the place smelled like a shoot-off and a haymow. I never went there again that I can recall. Teddy and Vern slowly became just two more faces in the halls and in 3:30 detention. We nodded and said hi. That was all. It happens. Friends come in and out of your life like busboys in the restaurant. Did you ever notice that? But when I think of that dream, the corpses under the water pulling like placeably at my legs, it seems right that it could be that way. Some people drown, that's all. It's not fair, but it happens. Some people drown. Vern Tessio was killed in a house fire that swept a Lewiston apartment building in 1966 in Brooklyn and the Bronx. They call that sort of apartment building a slum tenement, I believe. The fire department said it started around 2 a.m, and the entire building was nothing but cinders in the cellar hole by dawn. There had been a large, drunken party. Vern was there. Someone fell asleep in one of the bedrooms with a live cigarette going. Vern himself may be drifting off, dreaming of his pennies. They identified him and the 4 others who died by their teeth. Teddy went in a squalid car crash. That was 1971, I think, or maybe it was early 72. There used to be a saying when I was growing up, if you go out alone, you're a hero. Take somebody else with you, and you're dog piss. Teddy, who had wanted nothing but the service since the time he was old enough to want anything, was turned down by the Air Force and classified F4 by the draft. Anyone who had seen his glasses and his hearing aid knew it was going to happen. Anyone but Teddy. In his junior year at high school, he got a 3-day vacation from school for calling the guidance counselor a lying sack of shit. The GO had observed Teddy coming in every so often, like every day, and checking over his career board for new service literature. He told Teddy that maybe he should think about another career, and that was when Teddy blew his stack. He was held back a year for repeated absences, tardies, and the attendant flunked courses, but he did graduate. He had an ancient Chevy Bel Air, and he used to hang around the places where Ace and Fuzzy and the rest had hung around before him. The pool hall, the dance hall, Suki's Tavern, which is closed now, and the Mellow Tiger, which isn't. He eventually got a job with the Castle Rock Public Works Department, filling up holes with hot patch. The crash happened over in Harlow. Teddy's Bel Air was full of his friends. 2 of them had been part of that group he and Vern took to bossing around way back in 1960. And they were all passing around a couple of joints and a couple of bottles of pop-off. Yeah, pop-off. They hit a utility pole and sheared it off, and the Chevy rolled 6 times. One girl came out technically still alive. She lay for 6 months in what the nurses and orderlies at Central Maine General call the C&T ward, cabbages and turnips. Then some merciful phantom pulled the plug on her respirator. Teddy DeChamp was posthumously awarded the Dog Piss of the Year award. Chris enrolled in the college courses in his second year of junior high. He and I both knew if he waited any longer, it would be too late. He would never catch up. Everyone jawed at him about it. His parents, who thought he was putting on airs, his friends, most of whom dismissed him as a pussy, the guidance counselor who didn't believe he could do the work, and most of all the teachers who didn't approve of his duck-tailed, leather-jacketed, engineer-booted apparition who had materialized without warning in their classrooms. You could see that the sight of those boots and the many-zippered jacket offended them in connection with such high-minded subjects as algebra, Latin, and earth science. Such attire was meant for shops courses only. Chris sat among the well-dressed, vivacious boys and girls from the middle-class families in Castle View and Brickyard Hill, like some silent, brooding Grendel that might turn on them at any moment, produce a horrible roaring like the sound of dual glass pack mufflers, and gobble them up. Penny loafers, Peter Pan collars, button-down paisley shirts and all. He almost quit a dozen times that year. His father in particular hounded him, accusing Chris of thinking he was better than his old man, accusing Chris of wanting to go up there to the college so you can turn into a bankrupt. So you can turn me into a bankrupt. He once broke a Rheingold bottle over the back of Chris's head, and Chris wound up in the CMG emergency room again, where it took 4 stitches to close his scalp. His old friends, most of whom were now majoring in smoking area, catcalled him on the streets. The guidance counselor huckstered him to take at least some shop courses so he wouldn't flunk the whole slate. Worst of all, of course, was just this. He'd been fucking off for the entire first 7 years of his public education, and now the bill had come due with a vengeance. We studied together almost every night, sometimes for as long as 6 hours at a stretch. I always came away from those sessions exhausted, and sometimes I came away frightened as well. Frightened by his incredulous rage at just how murderously high that bill was. Before he could even begin to understand introductory algebra, he had to relearn the fractions that he and Teddy and Vern had played pocket pool in the 5th grade. Before he could even begin to understand Pater Noster Quies and Solis. Belle, what does that mean? Pater Noster Quies and Solis? This one here. What does this mean? Pater Noster Quies. How do you say that? I don't think it's Pater Noster Quies and Solis, but
Pater Noster Quies in Calais.
What does that mean? You know what it means?
No.
Why? Why?
Because I don't recognize them.
Oh, you don't know it? I wonder if that's Latin.
Yeah, I mean, I know key and
we're going to find out.
Let's
find out. Oh, it's No. Really? No way. I should know it. So it's actually Latin. Our Father who art in heaven. That's what it means. I should know that, but I didn't. Anyway, before he could even begin to understand it, he had to be told what nouns and propositions and objects were. On the inside of his English grammar, neatly lettered, were the words fuck gerunds. His compositional ideas were good and not badly organized, but his grammar was bad, and he approached the whole business of punctuation as if it were if with a shotgun. He tore out his copy of Werner's and bought another. Oh wow! Bought another at the Portland bookstore. It was the first hardcover book he actually owned, and it became a queer sort of Bible to him. But by our junior year in high school, he had been accepted. Neither of us made top honors, but I came out 7th and Chris stood 19th. We were both accepted to the University of Maine, but I went on to Oronoque campus, while Chris enrolled at the Portland campus, pre-law. Can you believe that? More Latin. We both dated through high school, but no girl ever came between us. Does it sound like we were faggot? It would have to most of our friends, Vern and Teddy included. But it was only survival. We were clinging to each other in deep water. I've explained about Chris, I think. My reasons for clinging to him were less definable. His desire to get away from Castle Rock and out of the mill's shadow seemed to me to be my best part, and I could not just leave him to sink or swim on his own. If he had drowned that part of me would have drowned with him, I think. Near the end of 1971, Chris went into the Chicken Delight in Portland to get a 3-piece snack bucket. Just ahead of him, 2 men started arguing about which one had been first in line. One of them pulled a knife. Chris, who had always been the best of us at making peace, stepped between them and was stabbed in the throat. The man with the knife had spent time in 4 different institutions. He had been released from Shawshank State Prison only the week before. Chris died almost instantly. I read about it in the paper. Chris had been finishing his 2nd year of graduate studies. Me, I had been married a year and a half and was teaching high school English. My wife was pregnant and I was trying to write a book. When I read the news item, student fatally stabbed in Portland restaurant, I told my wife I was going out for a milkshake. I drove out of town, parked, and cried for him. Cried for damn near half an hour, I guess. I couldn't have done that in front of my wife. Much as I love her, it would have been pussy. Okay, let's see if I can see now. Ugh. Me? I'm a writer now. Like I said, a lot of critics think what I write is shit, and a lot of the time I think they're right. But it still freaks me out to put those words, freelance writer, down in the occupation blank of the forms you have to fill out at credit desks and in doctors' offices. My story sounds so much like a fairy tale that it's fucking absurd. I sold the book, and it was made into a movie, and the movie got good reviews, and it was a smash hit besides. This all happened by the time I was 26. The second book was made into a movie as well as the third. As was the third. I told you, it's fucking absurd. Meanwhile, my wife doesn't seem to mind having me around the house, and we have 3 kids now. They all seem perfect to me, and most of the time, I'm happy. But like I said, the writing isn't so easy or as much fun as it used to be. The phone rings a lot. Sometimes I get headaches, bad ones, and then I have to go into a dim room and lie down until they go away. The doctors say they aren't true migraines. He called them stress aches and told me to slow down. I worry about myself sometimes. What a stupid habit that is. And yet, I can't quite seem to stop. And I wonder if there is really any point to what I'm doing. or what I'm supposed to make of the world where a man can get rich playing Let's Pretend. But it's funny how I saw Ace Merrill again. My friends are dead, but Ace is alive. I saw him pulling out of the mill parking lot just after 3 o'clock. After the 3 o'clock whistle, the last time I took my kids down home to see my dad. The 52 Ford had become a 77 Ford station wagon. A faded bumper sticker said Reagan Bush 1980. His hair was mowed into a crew top, and he'd gotten fat. The sharp, handsome features I remembered were buried in an avalanche of flesh. I had left the kids with Dad long enough to go downtown and get the paper. I was standing at the corner of Maine and Carbine, and he glanced at me as I waited to cross. There was no signs of recognition on his face, on the face of this 32-year-old man who had broken my nose in another dimension of time. I watched him wheel the Ford wagon into the dirt parking lot beside the Mellow Tiger, get out, hitch at his pants, and walk inside. I could imagine the brief wedge of country western as he opened the door, the brief sour whiff of Nick and Gansett on draft, the welcoming shouts of the other regulars as he closed the door and placed his large ass on the same stool, which had probably held him up for at least 3 hours every day of his life, except Sundays, since he was 21. I thought, so that's what Ace is now. I looked to the left, and beyond the mill I could see the Castle River, not so wide now, but a little cleaner, still flowing under the bridge between Castle Rock and Harlow. The trestle upstream is gone, and the river is still around. So am I. It was the story from a writer's point of view of what had happened when they were 12 years old, going on 13, the summer of their 6th grade year, going into middle school. So it's interesting. You can take an entire summer and simply take one weekend and put it into a book. And emotional is what I am. I'm a very emotional person. So when something sad happens, I started getting teary-eyed, and finally Chris was just it. Chris was the last one. And yeah, it was a really good movie, and it was a really good book, I think. I think it was well done. So I am going to probably take tonight off. I'm not sure. It all depends, because I know tomorrow night I will not be reading. I have a party with my son at the place where he and his friend go. So we're going to go there. I'll just sit and chill while he enjoys his party. He's going to go as G.I. Joe. He's even wearing button pants. So that's a plus. Yeah, he's just got a jacket, a green jacket, green t-shirt, green pants, and he'll have his shoes, and he'll have his hat, so he'll be all ready to go. So this is all put together in a matter of a couple days. Anyway, I am going to let y'all go. It's been a good morning so far, and we're now into afternoon. So you guys have a good day. I do apologize for the interruption of I don't even know what it is. I want to offer a promotion to your channel. I don't need any promotions. I don't know what this is. So I'm just like, whatever. Seriously. I apologize for it. I hope I deleted it. But I don't know. I'm not even gonna pay attention. Like, I just deleted it, and I have to look at it, but hopefully you guys do not. Anyway, I just said no thank you and kept on reading. So I did have to read it, though. I wanted to see what it was. I thought maybe it was something about the book, but it wasn't. Anywho, I want to thank you guys for sticking with me. I want to thank you guys for being here. We did this in 7 parts. We are awesome. So I will see you guys again soon. If not tonight, then tomorrow morning. Y'all have a good afternoon. Love y'all. Bye.